Hello, everybody. Welcome to IST 140. I'm, of course, Professor S. This is today's lecture. Let's get into it. So today what we're doing is we're going to talk about nested loops and variable scope. This is where when we're getting into nested loops and, well, loops in general, that's when a lot of the programming really gets kind of challenging. So I'm going to walk through some stuff. Um, and there's an aspect that I think we need to address when we're thinking about nested things. It's definitely more of an issue, or is it not more of an issue? It's definitely an issue with methods and creating classes and things like that. But we should start explaining it now or exploring it now when we're dealing with loops, and that's going to be part of the walkthrough and things like that. And that's variable scope. So we'll talk about variable scope and nested loops today. Okay. So anyways, what the heck is variable scope? So the idea is like variables only work in blocks that they are created, right? So if you create one in the main method, you can only use it in that main method, right? It's not going to carry over to other programs. It's just that main method, right? And so the idea is like as we get into more concepts, we're coming into more blocks, right? So for instance, last week, we started talking about if statements. So we have an if statement block, right? And so if you create a variable in that block, that's the only place you can use it. So if you want to use it outside of that block, you got to create it outside of that block. But the idea is like with variables, they work inside of nested blocks. So the block that they're in and anything inside of them. So let's say we created this variable in this, let's say green block, okay? And then we have these other blocks of code. So we have the orange and the yellow are all nested inside of that green one. So we can use that variable inside those, or we can reference that variable in those other nested blocks, but we can't use them outside of the green block, right? So like the brown block that's kind of like right here, this wouldn't that variable wouldn't be able to be used in that block. In order for us to use it in that brown block, we'd have to put it in the red block first, so then it could be used in both the green, the orange, yellow, and then as well as that brown or burnt orange, whatever you want. And then we wouldn't even be able to use it for the blocks over there, with the blue, the light blue, the dark blue, any of one of those. It's just separate. So we'd either have to create a new block or somehow work with it to get it in that block. But like as it stands right now, it doesn't really work in that block. Okay. So you have to kind of keep a track of where that variable is, and that's in a thing called variable scope. The one other thing that we're going to do when we're talking about nested loops, and so I don't have a slide for nested loops. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's loops inside of loops. Boom. There you go. But one of the things that we will be working with this unit, this model, is data validation. So a couple of things. So we have two new methods for scanner, has next int, has next double, right? Those are both new methods. And they kind of work similar to next int and next double, except they return Boolean values. So the idea is like if it reads a int for has next int, it will return true, right? The value would be true. If it reads a double or reads a letter or special character or something like that, it'd be false because that's not an int, right? Similar thing with a double, except it applies as a double. That's it. We'll see it in, it's helpful for loops. But the one thing that I want to kind of point out is that with the directions, you'll be asked to do some data validation as you go along throughout the rest of the semester. And something to keep in mind is that just pay attention to the directions that say account for this sort of weird thing, right? So if it says run a loop for only ints and stuff like that, then you can assume that it's what I'm trying to say is that you can safely assume that the user is going to try to follow the directions as best as possible. And so any sort of data validation that you have to do will be requested in the directions. It's not going to be assumed that the user is going to actively try to break your code unless it says that they will. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And if you have any questions about that sort of thing, like user trying to break your code, ask us, okay? And make sure you give some time for us to respond, okay? Anyways, We're going to see these, the has next int. Well, I'll use the has next int. I'm not going to use the has next double because you'll see how it is right with it. But let's go into IntelliJ and see that in action right now. Okay. All right, we're going to begin this walkthrough in Canvas. We're going in walkthroughs, and you're going to go into WT 6.2, and we're going to copy everything below variables scope. There we go, including variable scope, and heck, we'll just include this little bracy. So I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to go into IntelliJ. And notice that I have this all set up. I already have the scanner in here. I'm telling you this now so you'll know, so I'm not like scrolling around all over the place. And then also remember that braces that I had, that's for the main method. In fact, this whole code is for the main method. So I'm going to paste it in the main method I have. This thing is for well, it will be for the public class. But when I paste this code, there we go. It's all for the main method. See? All right. So anyways, let's begin the walkthrough as we talk about this thing. So anyways, we're going to begin looking at the variable scope. I'm going to remove these things so we can kind of see this in action. So here I have this code right here, and notice that this is red. And notice when I run it, it doesn't like it. See, the thing is that it can't find the symbol num1. It's right here in this if statement. And the idea is like in these blocks of code, we have num1 is declared and initialized in this block. And then once it's done with the block that it was declared, it gets rid of it, right? So it's so what we have to do is we have to do int num1 equals, well, even look at this. If we do num1, so we declare it here, and so we don't need to declare it here. And so here we have it initialized in the if statement, and notice it still has an issue with it because the idea is it doesn't really look to see if bool val is true or false. It looks to see there's an if statement. So, and this is where it's declared. And so no matter what the it says like, hey, I feel like there's a chance that num1 might not be initialized, and then you're going to print it, and so it has a problem with that. So really the solution is to initialize it, put some value that it's not, and then have it make sure it changes it. So now when it runs, it says 32, and that's what it is. Ignore these stars. We'll come back to those later. That's in this code right here that we'll get to in a bit. So we're going to keep seeing those stars. All right, so anyways, let's look at another block of code. All right, so here we have the bool value is true, while bool value, so it's the same thing as before, except with an if or while statement. So the idea is like, remember, a if statement or while statement works essentially the same as an if statement, except once it finishes that block, it will check to see if that condition's true again and keep going while it's still true. If it's never true, it skips it. If it changes, then it will be, then it will stop the loop. Otherwise, the loop will keep on going, right? So it works the same way. And feel free to play around with this. You get this code, so if you have questions about it. Here we have the, so notice outside the block, we have it declared and initialized, and then we have it redeclared. So only declare it once in whatever it's being used, because it can be used inside blocks that it is in. Or so like this block is inside the main method. So since the num2 was created in the main method, then it works. Okay. All right. Anyways, or that it can work in that sub blocks. Same thing with the while loop here. Oops. Okay. All right. Anyways, I'm going to now we're going to get into some data validation and see some nested loops. Actually, first, before we get into nested loops, let's get into data validation. All right, so first what we're going to do is we're going to create our scanner object. Then we're going to prompt user for a number, and then we're going to continually read users' numbers until enter a letter. Okay. And then we're going to print the sum. Until they enter a letter. Awesome. All right. So here, let me just make this all neat. All right. Until they read it. Okay. So anyways, so we have to create a scanner object. So I'm going to put in scanner in equals new scanner system in. All right, prompt the user for a number. So we're gonna, this is where the directions come in. So we're for the user system dot out dot print enter a number, enter in numbers to add to sum. When complete, actually just say enter in Q I'll just do Q. Enter in Q to terminate. All right, so then the idea is like the user keeps on entering numbers until they enter Q, and that's when the thing is over and it will print the calculation. So anyways, what we have here is we need to, well here, we can print the sum. So we know that we're going to do this. So we need system out print ln the sum of the numbers is sum. And notice it doesn't like that because we have to add that to the loop. So we have while in dot has next int. So that's the new method that we were talking about before. That's what's going to keep this loop going. So while the user keeps entering an int, this will keep on going. Okay. So we want, let's create a new variable. So user int user num is whatever we read from the command line in dot next int. And there we go. And then we want sum to be equal to whatever sum is plus user num. All right. Now notice sum is red here and sum is red here. Because the idea we haven't declared initialize it. If we declare initialize it here, so first of all, it would keep on, this doesn't work because this is adding to whatever sum was, and if we're declaring it here, we can't do that plus equals because it's adding something that hasn't been initialized, and so that's weird. And so if we were to do something along the lines of here, int sum equals 0, this is also an issue because sum, well, I mean, so thinking about scope, but also look here, we set sum equal to 0, we read what the user enters, and then we add that to the sum, and then we come back here and set sum equal to 0, and then read whatever the user enters. So even if this were to work with the scope, we would keep on erasing whatever sum was. So we need to declare and initialize this outside of this while loop. Okay, and so now this will work. And so notice that for this while loop, what's going to happen is it's going to check to see if whatever's entered is an int. And if it is, it'll continue doing this. And it will stop when it's no longer an int. Let me show you. So we say run. And helps if I use semicolons, huh? All right, so I run it. All right, enter numbers to add to sum, enter q to terminate. So I'm going to do 5. And then it's not stopped, so I keep enter 5. So I did 5 3 times, and then I'm going to do q. And notice that it says that the sum of the numbers is 15. And the reason being is because on the first iteration, it read that the number was 5, so it stored user number as 5, and then added to sum. So that means the sum was 5, right? And so then it read again what the user entered. It was a number. So then it stores that number as user number, and it adds it to the sum. It was 5 again, so now it is 10. It reads another integer. So we'll continue on here. So it stores it as user num, and then adds it to the sum, so that the third 5 means it's 15. And then it reads from the command line. It gets a q, which is not an int, so it's false, and so it skips out, and it goes over here. The sum of the numbers is sum, right? So instead of keeping on going and reading the value so many times, it's stopping when it's no longer getting a int. Okay. So, and it's giving that sum. So that's how that works. Let's do move on to the next thing. All right. So then for the nested for loop, so we've been seeing this code before, like earlier whenever I run it, and notice that we have this is for this portion right here, and notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows, right? And each of these rows has 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. So notice, like, both of these start at 1, and this one is 6, and this one is 4. So which one is tied to the columns and which one is tied to the rows? Well, since there's 4 columns here, this 4 seems to be tied to the columns, right? And there's 6 rows here, so it seems as though this would be tied to the 6, right? So let's test it out. Let's change this to 5, and so now we should have 5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is. And then this one is, we'll change this to, I don't know, 3. Okay. There we go. And so notice that now we have 3 stars. So this has to do with the amount of columns, and it should kind of make sense because the idea is, like, for these nested loops, for each of these iteration of these for loops, it has to complete everything before it begins a new iteration, right? So even though we have a I and a j that we're doing simultaneously, we have for this j, for this for loop, in order for us to move to the next iteration of I, this big loop out here, we have to finish this loop up. So this loop's going to go really fast, and then once it's done, it moves to this and it gets a next line. So notice it starts at 1, ends at 3. And so that's why it does 1, 2, 3, and then does next line, 1, 2, 3, next line, 1, 2, 3, next line, 1, 2, 3, next line, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and so it does that 5 times. Notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I did a table in class, and we're gonna go more of this. You'll see this as a table in the next lecture, but I'm just trying to present it in different ways to hopefully provide more chances of making sense for y'all. Because again, this is tricky at first. It just takes practice. You got to practice at this. It's everybody. This is not easy for everybody when they're first doing it. Remember, programming, it's a journey. Everybody's at different points. Okay. Anyways, so you see, we want to manipulate this so it's a triangle, so that we start with 1 and it gets progressively more and more each time. And so if you think back to this, this was like, it starts at 1, 2, and 3, and we think about where it ends is right here. And so if we're doing 1 where it ends, and then 2 where it ends, 3 where it ends, 4 where it ends, 5 where it ends, then notice that where it ends is what the value of I is at that time, right? So when it was 1, it's just 1. When I is 2, it ends at 2. When I is 3, it'll end at 3, and so on and so forth. So let's see what happens when we put, instead of 3, we put I. All right, so I'm going to run it. And so it did those things from before, but now look, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it did the reverse triangle. Interesting, huh? All right, now I'm going to copy and paste it down here. All right, so now what we want to do is alternate values. And so what I'm going to do is have, like, the 1s are always star, the 2s are always minuses, 3s are always stars. So really, for J, it's when J is even, it's going to be the minus, and when it's odd, it's going to be the plus, right? And so in here, so I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to use this. And so the idea is it has to do with J, right? Because when J is even, we want it to be the minus, and when it's odd, we want the stars. So we have to look at what J is to know what we want to print. So the way that we find out if something's even or odd is with this percent sign. And we'll do %2 == 0. Let's kind of talk about this. So in Zybooks, they went over this a whole lot more. I haven't talked about this in lectures so much, but like what this is saying is like, you know, with integer division, there's like 2 things that are important with integer division. Think back to when you did long division. You found the quotient and you had the remainder, right? It's what was left. And it really, there's like always a remainder. It's just sometimes that remainder is 0. And what this percent sign does is find that integer remainder. In math, we call it the modulus or mod. But to find out, think about it, to find out if something's even, if we divide by 2, the remainder should be 0. And that's what we're saying here, is like if the remainder when we divide 2 is 0, then we want this to be true, right? And so this is saying that J is even. So when J is even, we want it to print not the asterisk, but the minus sign, right? And it's like all the other examples when it's odd, because remember an integer is either even or odd, and so this is when it's even, and this is when it's odd. And so it'll either print the minus or the star. So when it's even, it'll do the minus, and when J is odd, it'll do the star, right? So look what happens when I run this. So notice we have the star, star minus, star minus star, star minus stars minus. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this last block, and it says do alternate rows are like that. So instead of like every other value, it's every other row. So like we have the star minuses, stars minuses. And so if you think about it, the thing that's alternating isn't every value of J, it's every value of I. So it's dependent upon if I is even or not. And so if we do I is even, then we do a minus. Otherwise, if it's odd, or otherwise, which the only other option is it's odd, it'll do a star. And so now when we run it, notice the last triangle will be what we're looking for. Star, minus, 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 or star, 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 or asterisk, whatever, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now I know I kind of flew through these, but the point that I'm trying to make is that what you should try to do is like come back to this maybe tomorrow or whatever and practice doing this on your own. These like weird little loops that don't do anything, that like have like that. I mean, like it prints these things out, but like that's about it. The sole purpose of this is to practice your nested loops. So you can kind of speak the Java language of repetition, I guess, right? So you can do this sort of thing. This is good practice. So come back to it, try to do this walkthrough, these parts. And then if anything that you're struggling with, come back and watch the video to see how I did things. Okay. That's how you get better at this, is by that practice, okay? Make sure you're also doing the Zybooks and do the practice quiz. Remember, after the class on Monday, you will not be able to do the practice quiz anymore, okay? Anyways, I think that's good for today. Make sure you finish the Zybooks before Friday so that you can start working on the programs, all right? Anyways, that's what I got for you guys. I'll see you all later. Bye. Hey, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please press the like button below. It lets me know I'm doing something right. If you have any questions about any of the content, please send a message to both me and the rest of the teaching team in Canvas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Don't send it through normal email. You will not get as fast response. If you have any suggestions for how I can make these videos better, please leave in the comments below. Don't forget to roundhouse kick the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified for the next video. Anyways, I think that's good for now. See y'all later. Bye.